But it's a republic if you can keep it, and I don't have high hopes for society right now. Adele Keim is counsel for the Becket Fund for Religious Liberty and represented Hobby Lobby in their historic Supreme Court case. She knows these laws a lot better than I do, and she's here to talk with us about it. Adele, God bless you. Thanks so much for joining us today. It is so frustrating to see people misrepresent what RFRA is, the Indiana's version, which when I was looking at the federal version of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act that was introduced by Schumer, and when I read what Indiana had, I mean, the language was virtually the same. Maybe a couple of words were ordered.
Absolutely, Dana. It's a pleasure to be here, and you're completely right. The RFRA law that's been passed in Indiana is almost identical to the RFRA law that's been on the books for over 20 years in the federal government and in 19 other states. It differs in just 2 respects, and neither of those respects should be controversial at all unless you're a liberal law professor, in which case the sky is falling. The first way is that the Indiana law makes it crystal clear that Indiana intends to protect not just individuals, but also family businesses when they exercise their religion. That shouldn't be controversial because the Supreme Court said that's right just a year ago in the Hobby Lobby case.
Oh, wow.
The second way the Indiana law is different, right? So good. Makes sense that Indiana would want to make that crystal clear because, as we see, some people can't take no for an answer when it comes to religious liberty. The second way that the Indiana law is slightly different from the federal law is that the Indiana law also makes it absolutely clear that it applies in suits between private parties. But that's not a big deal either, Dana, because 4 circuits covering states like New York and California, bastions of conservatism, right, have said very clearly that the federal RFRA ought to apply in suits between private parties. There's some courts that have gone the other way, but major courts in places like New York and California, and dare I say it, the 8th Circuit too, have said that this law, the federal RFRA, should be available in suits between private parties. Makes total sense, right? If someone's going to use my state's law as a battering ram against my rights, shouldn't I be able to throw up the wall of religious freedom and say, please, don't come at me, don't fine me, don't put me in jail. I am trying to follow the dictates of my conscience here. I'm not intending to break the law. I'm following a higher law. And the state has to tread very carefully when it does that.
And as I understand too, Adele, that section of Indiana's RFRA, that was inspired by what we saw transpire in New Mexico, where the New Mexico Supreme Court ruled against, even under the RFRA defense of Elaine Photography, who, that's one of the other examples you were talking about, where the states, you're using state law as a battering ram. You're engaging in lawfare, using the state law to go and force someone to compromise the free practice of religion. They lost that case, and so this seemed to be, at least how I interpreted it, this is sort of a proactive measure to prevent something like that from happening again.
Absolutely. It was clarifying the law, and they said New Mexico got it wrong, and we're going to get it right. And so that's one of the things they did. But Indiana went the way of California, New York, hardly conservative jurisdictions. Listen, RFRA is here to protect minorities, religious minorities. And if RFRA falls, let me tell you who the victims are going to be. They're going to be religious minorities like my client, Native American Pastor Soto, who had his eagle feathers, sacred to his faith, confiscated by federal agents. He was threatened with 15 years in jail for possessing eagle feathers that he used in a religious ceremony. These federal agents, they've got to have something better to do.
And they're not even on the extinction list anymore. They're not even on the endangered animals list anymore.
Right. So Pastor Soto is protected by RFRA. You know who else is protected by RFRA? A Sikh IRS employee. Her coworkers could bring knives and scissors and box cutters into work with them any day of the week. But she wasn't allowed to bring a tiny religious symbol in with her. She lost her job over her adherence to her faith. The Becket Fund stepped in, we defended her, and now it looks like she's going to get her job back. She would be the victim if RFRA fell. I'll tell you about another victim, Native American kindergartner in Texas. He tried to go to school. The school said, we have a dress code. You can't wear a braid. At school, he said, my faith requires me to keep my hair long and braided. RFRA protected him. So let me tell you who would be the victim if RFRA fell. It would be Native American kindergartners, Pastor Soto. It would be Mrs. Tagore with her religious kirpan. It would be religious minorities. And you know who else would be the victim? It would be religious people who are motivated by their faith to serve the poor and who have opened homeless shelters and soup kitchens. I can't tell you the number of times that greedy city councilmen say we're not getting enough tax revenue from this nonprofit that's doing charitable work in the middle of our city. We want to replace it with a business, so we're going to try to zone it out of existence. RFRA protects the homeless shelters. RFRA protects the gospel rescue missions. RFRA protects the soup kitchens. The people who would be victimized by RFRA are the people who are the poor and who are the marginalized, the people who can least afford it. That's who would go down if RFRA went down.
And this law, none of this has ever explicitly mentioned anyone who is gay, lesbian, anything like that. It's all just a defensive shield from state law, as you mentioned. It's amazing, Adele, how the purposeful, I think, misinterpretation of this law for an agenda, how far and fast it has spread.
I think you need to ask yourself, why are these things coming up at this time? These laws have been on the books for 20 years. They've done so much good. And let me tell you something else. These laws are not a trump card. RFRA doesn't say you get out of jail free. I wish, right? I defend these cases. What RFRA means is my clients get their day in court. They get to show that they have a sincere religious practice that they're engaging in, and that some government law, regulation, some government bureaucrat somewhere is preventing them from exercising their faith. What RFRA does is it says to the government, look, we have a long history of protecting people's faith. We know that Americans disagree about God and religion. But if the government's going to come into someone's life and dictate what they have to do, they need to be very, very, very careful if they're trying to infringe on their conscience.
That's right.
Why is that? Because we know we protect our founders protected the Quakers from having to serve in the military because they knew what purpose does it serve to make these people go to war at gunpoint. The Quakers went to jail, and some of them even died for their faith. And so our founding generation looked at that example of conscientious objectors and said, it stops here. We're going to respect a sincere religious belief, even if it's costly for us.
Absolutely.
RFRA embodies the same principle.
Absolutely. Adele Keim with the Beckett Fund. Follow them on Twitter at the Beckett Fund. Adele, thank you so much for what you do. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dana.
When we return, have you heard of the band Will?